You edge the poolside, chlorine-stenched air filling your nose, the sound of splashing and lifeguards whistling bouncing off the indoor pool facility walls. The water ripples, family and friends egging you to cannonball in, the pool almost beckoning you to jump with its suggestive waves. Yet there remains an underlying fear, one that brings your hands to your face and causes your teeth to chatter, even as the pool, clear as glass with chlorine, hides no secrets. A monster, some teeth-gnashing megalodon ascending from the depths of extinction, Leviathan curling its barbed tail to strike its prey at any moment, or even some vast, unknowable force, ancient as Earth, hardly comprehensible to human minds, waiting, dreaming to breach the surface. No matter what form this gargantuan, invisible monster takes, you know one thing. Once you jump in, you will not return to shore. You take a moment, recompose yourself, and laugh off the fear. Maybe a product of too much research on the bloop, that deep ocean sound continuing to confound scientists as to its cause. Or maybe too much binging infographics videos on sea monsters, krakens and Loch Ness monsters, mysterious globsters cast onto shores throughout America. Whatever the origin, the thought seems ridiculous to you now, and your fears regarding invisible sharks stalking the pool perimeter escape your mind as you hurl yourself into the water. SCP-1128. In the vast archives of a hidden site, stuffed into a drawer amongst uncountable horrors like it, the SCP Foundation holds a description of a vast, unfathomable horror that'll make you more suspicious the next time you pass a pool, lake, or even a bathtub or puddle of water. SCP-1128 is a gigantic aquatic monster lurking in waters unknown, and that's all the Foundation will let anyone not assigned to testing know about it. While the Foundation has never shed away from those Moby Dicks of the deep, including the several thousand-kilometer-long arthropod SCP-169, and has even utilized such predators in the past for their own benefit, like the lengthy beast SCP-3000, SCP-1128 poses a unique challenge. Anyone who knows of its description beyond surface-level details will fall under the anomaly's effect. The representation you see now is merely an artist's interpretation of the basic prompt. The Foundation, of course, had to discover the monster's effects in the first place. The chain of communication becomes foggy, but a tip from an unknown source alerted the Foundation to the monster's existence and details regarding its manifestation. One man who had stumbled upon the entity's full description started developing acute thalassophobia, the fear of large bodies of water. Not bodies in the water, mind you. The man refused to relax on the beach or fly overseas, claiming he could see the monster's dark silhouette lurking underwater, ever scouting for him. This eventually extended to even closed bodies of water, like lakes, ponds, and pools, still insisting that the creature swam under the surface, trailing him wherever he went. His friends dismissed him as crazy, and he too believed he had fallen under some hysteria. He decided to take a nice, warm bath to soothe his mind and ease his troubles. He turned on the faucet and let the tub fill up. He put on his best bathing suit, ready to calm his anxiety once and for all. This had been plaguing his mind for far too long, and he was ready to rid all the negativity surrounding this phobia. Basically, he was sick and tired of being sick and tired over the idea of it all. He mustered up the courage, and with the anticipation to just simply relax, he took his first confident step into the tub. He paused for a moment and breathed a sigh of relief. He picked up his other foot and stepped fully into the bath. Splash! He fell straight down right through the tub. Waves and bubbles blocked his vision. His arms flailed as he sunk deeper into an abyss of water and fear. This wasn't supposed to happen, he thought. Several moments later, while still in a full-on panic, The buoyancy of his body began to slow his sinking. The bubbles from his underwater screams rose above him, and he began to follow their direction, scrambling back up to where he'd come. Just as he made it back to the surface of the tub water, choking and hyperventilating in terror, he swore he could see a distant creature, the very same that stalked him through oceans and pools, staring at him. Shaking, he hoisted himself out of the water and ran out of the house. Hysterical, he ran through the surrounding neighborhood, desperately searching for someone he could relay his experience to. Blinded by fear, he neglected to spot a puddle in the middle of the road he ran on. He raised his foot, arched forward, and landed straight into the seemingly shallow water. Splash! Again, he found himself completely submerged and drowning. After a minute, he did emerge from the puddle, but not in one piece. Knowledgeable of this incident, the Foundation set about expunging any traces of the monster's description from the world, physical and digital. The description had low distribution according to the results of Foundation web crawlers, but this hardly stopped the Foundation's endeavor. With forum posts deleted, individuals located and amnesticized, and catalogs trawled to ensure the description did not proliferate, the Foundation engaged in what it does best: questionably ethical experiments. First, they had an anonymous D-class, uninformed of the creature's effect, read the description of the beast. While the pamphlet they gave him confused him somewhat, he didn't feel particularly frightened by the entity, and he confusedly put on the diving suit the Foundation testers provided him. As they connected him to a cable and told him to enter a bathtub, the D-class did as they instructed him. The D-class expressed initial confusion at the tub's depth, remarking that it looked so tiny from the outside. As the D-class continued to descend, he analyzed his surroundings, realizing the nautical reality that enveloped him. He asked how an ocean got stuffed into a bathtub, but the test organizer had no room for miscellaneous talk. He continued to descend until he hit the sandy bottom, seaweed covering the ocean floor. The D-class looked around. Tropical fish swam in schools, coral covered the seabed, and to his right dropped an immense cliff, a sheer edge. The test organizer advised the D-class to approach the cliff, and he begrudgingly complied. As he struggled in his diving suit, he fell back and screamed. SCP-1128, the aquatic horror, swam distantly, gracefully even, and paid no attention to the D-class so fixated upon it. He realized that the creature matched the one he read on the pamphlet, and almost complained about this when he saw a blue whale swimming alongside SCP-1128. Compared to the monster, the whale looked like a guppy. The whale glided in front of SCP-1128's jaws. The monster remained tranquil, stared at its prey, and bit the whale in two with one chaw. Its teeth glistened in the water. The test operator requested the D-class to pull back, and as the cable began to draw him toward where he came, the D-class stared at the creature, swallowing the chunks of whale whole. The D-class's eyes remained fixated on the creature, partially in fright, partially in awe. He wondered how ocean trawlers hadn't discovered such a giant beast yet, with the world effectively under 100% surveillance, something the D-class knew far too well as a convict. Yet the D-class recognized, and if not comprehended, partially understood the ocean's vastness and mystery. The dark depths reveal no inkling as to their contents, and a creature like a giant squid or the coelacanth can remain in hiding for centuries, if not millennia. It held him in wondrous thought to consider the vastness of the depths. When SCP-1128 stopped and stared at the D-class, this feeling of wonder was quickly replaced with fear. As the creature approached, the D-class pleaded with the test operators for help. As the test operators accelerated the rate of the cable returning, the D-class took short, shallow breaths, filling his body with dangerous nitrogen as he ascended, further impairing his judgment. He had devolved into gibberish and screaming when, face to face, the monster consumed its prey. The cable went slack, and the test operator pulled up only a broken wire. Snap! The water turning a cloudy red. The test operator knew that the unprotected D-Class had no chance at survival against the monster, but he could potentially arm and shield them. He had another similarly ignorant D-Class once again dress in a scuba suit and enter the tub. However, the test operator placed the D-Class within a shark cage, a la the movie Jaws, and lowered the cage in with another cable and winch system. While unsure how this would fare with SCP-1128, the test operator remained hopeful that the D-Class could survive and recount his story. Unfortunately, as the cage lowered into the tub, the test operator received no response from the D-Class until the line spontaneously tightened, snapped, and loosened. Hoping to find the D-Class's remains, the test operator only found shredded pieces of metal, torn and twisted like taffy. The test operator decided that he could utilize the Foundation's arsenal to his advantage and used an anomalously toughened shark cage in his testing, perhaps using an anomaly like the clockwork machine SCP-914. He gained approval from his higher-ups to undergo this procedure, and after some testing, behind a shining, strong-as titanium shark cage, which he placed another D-Class within. Hoping for a success with the monster, however, proved unsatisfactory, as the same thing happened as the previous test, only without any sort of metallic remains. While bitter that the monster had won again, he wondered where the cage had landed. Meanwhile, Foundation forces labored tirelessly to find SCP-1128's location, hoping to avoid any civilian contact with the creature. Luckily, a GPS signal established itself upon the most recent D-Class's test, with the tracking device on the D-Class signifying the monster's general location. The Foundation had redacted the location of the monster, perhaps in a vain attempt to hide a very near threat from potential readers. The Foundation set up a team of only the most talented boaters in its forces, Mobile Containment Force Kappa-12 Sea Devils. Upon arriving at the location, the Sea Devils discovered the previously enhanced shark cage, completely undamaged. However, closer inspection revealed traces of human DNA on the bars, though the Foundation could not confirm whether the DNA belonged to the previously sent D-Class. The test operator, while glad his shark cage survived the monster's attack, still found himself dissatisfied with the overall results of the test. He knew he needed to quell this creature's impact before a large population viewed it or knew of it, but the horrible beast had evaded all attempts at peaceful interaction. Perhaps with a madness not unlike Captain Ahab yearning for the death of his white whale, the test operator armed a D-Class with a specialized weapon, designed to deal with aquatic threats promptly. This weapon, potentially another of the Foundation's precious arsenal, could potentially harm, if not kill, the creature. While he knew the Foundation's mission statement forbade unnecessary destruction, the test operator felt it may turn necessary if matters turn any worse. Thus, he sent his armed D-Class through the tub once more, ready to engage the beast in combat. The attempt, as one may expect, did not last long. The D-Class, upon spotting the creature, aimed his weapon at the monster and attacked it, but rather than drive the creature away, it only turned intently upon the D-Class, as if it desired a fight. The D-Class barely managed to scrape SCP-1128 before the creature devoured the D-Class, leaving the test operator once again empty-handed. Defeated and without any more resources to deal with the beast, the test operator ceased his attempts at besting the creature and followed the Foundation's more cautious approach, expunging any publicly found descriptions of SCP-1128 as needed and diverting any vessels away from the anomaly's exclusion zone, as maintained by the Sea Devils. While the creature had proven treacherous in unexpected situations prior, engulfing the man who first heard the creature's description in a rain puddle, researchers could hardly expect what would transpire. A D-Class, afflicted with the monster's effect and observed for testing, avoided all bodies of water as required. Eventually, however, the D-Class needed to interact with some kind of water, drinking water. In a choice between a little water exposure or certain death, the D-Class felt inclined to choose the former. He filled his cup with water and, for fun, placed his finger into the cup, dropping it into the water. SCP-1128, unseen from the outside, violently pulled the D-Class through the cup into its watery domain. The D-Class had not a chance to scream. This alarmed containment staff, now cognizant that even the tiniest specks of water could transport an afflicted person into SCP-1128's ocean territory, This proved particularly strenuous when a new report of a potential SCP-1128 manifestation arose. An old woman, isolated with her cats and knitting supplies, found an article online with a description of the monster. Frightened and disgusted by what she read, she closed the article and continued on with her monotonous life. Such a life would take a turn for the worse, however, when she too developed that all-encompassing water-based fear. Her apartment overlooked an outdoor pool, and one day looking outside, she swore she could see that same dark silhouette as the man did, lurking in the water among kids and parents playing. She swiftly closed the window curtains and taped the seams shut, allowing no light to peek through. Eventually, this paranoia affected her hygiene, neglecting showers and baths for fear of the creature's wrath. She swore she could see the silhouette in any individual droplet of water. Her skin began to flake as she avoided water as much as humanly possible, cracks developing on her arms, legs, and face, inflaming into rashes and itches. Her scratching further increased the flaking. She even eliminated water from her diet, sealing the faucets with duct tape and consuming exclusively orange juice. She threw out her cat's water bowls, dehydrating them. They pleaded with her as she continued to devolve, avoiding any contact with the outside world, even as it attempted to contact her. Eventually, a concerned neighbor contacted the local police concerning the situation, and the case caught the Foundation's radar, recognizing the symptoms of a potential SCP-1128 infection. A mobile task force disguised themselves as civilians to enter the apartment building and potentially interfere with the woman's condition. They entered the complex, climbing up the stairs with barraging equipment for forced entry, as would prove necessary to use to enter the woman's apartment. She had nailed the door shut with wood and sealed the cracks along the sides with plaster in an attempt to keep out any water vapor. She had similarly blocked the window with wood planks. A horrid miasma of dead skin and citrus filled the apartment, the old woman soaking it in, ever avoiding the dreaded monster. The Foundation task force attempted peaceful entry, knocking on the door and asking if anyone lived in the apartment. The woman couldn't speak if she wanted to. Her throat had dried to near silence, save a croak. Suddenly, the task force and the woman heard a rumbling noise outside. Thunder, rain. The woman panicked and yelped, "Don't come in here," in a froggy voice. The task force eventually decided they needed to use their equipment and entered via barrage. The door collapsed and an immediate dense air clogged the task force's sight, blinding and choking them. The woman shrieked and backed against the window inadvertently. The task force insisted they were here to help the woman, but she simply heaved heavily, saying something unintelligible in that dry, cracking voice. The rain began pounding on the window, patter, 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 as the task force attempted to gain hold of the woman. She resisted their movements, moving around the room while the task force intentionally avoided violent confrontation. The rain grew in its intensity as the woman continued running around her apartment, tripping over her starved cats. Eventually, she fell back onto the window, at which the boards blocking it fell onto the floor, exposing the pouring rain fully. She screamed as she saw the silhouette of the monster staring at her in every individual raindrop. One drop landed on her skin, and she violently vanished, pulled into a minuscule speck of water. The task force collapsed from exhaustion, perhaps dreading their inevitable amnestic treatment following exposure with an SCP-1128 afflictee. Yet they couldn't help but wonder what the old woman saw in a single speck of water that could cause that degree of fear and paranoia. The kind of fear only caused by entire oceans condensed into a single droplet. Besides the monster, what else did she see in those multitude of droplets? The fish that populated the sea, the whale carcasses left behind by SCP-1128, the sea devils viewed from below, drifting on the water unsuspecting. Just as one may view a grain of sand and see the Sahara, she too saw that raindrop and viewed an ocean entire, along with whatever malevolent creatures inhabit it. One may have more sympathy for the child, reluctant to jump into the pool water, knowing not necessarily that something inhabits that body of water, but that the body belongs to a cycle much larger than itself, larger than any sea or ocean, and the only thing that can traverse that cycle is a monster, a creature like SCP-1128. The task force went back to their local site to report what happened during the incident. Like so many incidents the Foundation deals with, the sum total of those that risk their lives for the greater good is a couple memory-erasing syringes and another update to documentation. A description of SCP-1128 remains in the stuffy locker, lurking in wait among other horrifying stories in the SCP database's Sea of Terror. Just like that test operator that attempted to best the monster, could the Foundation's attempts ever surmount the possibility of another person being afflicted? Could they conquer the sea? In a member of that task force's dreams, they perceive a dark blue ocean and the distant black shadow that resides within. And from this ocean, they can view the bathtubs, sinks, pools, puddles, cups of water, and rain droplets of the world, seen from below. Although they know not what SCP-1128 looks like, they too experience the fear it summons among those that do. The paranoia, the fear. Although it may not manifest directly in people's lives, it can always be observed, stalking, waiting, lurking under a murky surface, watching with hidden eyes. The ocean is a terrifying place. We've all heard the statistics. More than 80% of the ocean remains unexplored. That's most of the water covering the globe, completely unmapped and unobserved by science. It's a scary thought to dwell on, realizing that there's more water than land on Earth, and the sheer expanse of that water is so large that we've been unable to fully explore all of it. Just think, there are places in the ocean that have never been seen by a human. Who knows what's down there? If there was ever a personification of fear of the unknown, the ocean could definitely be it. Ancient shipwrecks sunk to the ocean floor, unknown sea creatures hiding away from humanity, and the general isolation of the suffocating dark blue the ocean swallows its victims with. All of these images that come to mind when thinking about the vast and mysterious depths of the sea. And no one is more familiar with nautical mysteries than the SCP Foundation. Today we'll be taking a look at SCP-5007, the Bass Strait, a wave of oceanic anomalies fit to make any seasoned sailor shiver in fear. The Bass Strait is an area of ocean dividing Tasmania and the Australian mainland. It's also the location of an unusually high amount of disappearances. Sailors disappearing from their ships, fishermen leaving in the night and never coming back, even civilians disappearing from the shores that connect to the strait. The Foundation was aware of these disappearances since 1858, but were only able to craft theories about what was causing them. Was it an anomalous group of interest, hostile aerial entities patrolling the skies above the strait, phenomenon associated with unidentified flying objects? What about subterranean anomalies, weather patterns, or time dilation? For nearly a century, the Foundation was unable to determine the cause of the high number of disappearances in the Bass Strait. And then the phenomenon suddenly revealed itself. In 1980, on a beach connected to the strait, Agent Taberner, an operative of the SCP Foundation, was vacationing with his wife Mary and his 3 young children. The Taberner family was simply enjoying their day when they saw what looked like balloons in the sky. They were approaching quickly, and naturally the family moved closer. What happened next was a whirlwind, and those balloons the family were so interested in lifted them up from the ground and carried them away. Agent Taberner tried to fight back, but there was nothing he could do, except report to the Foundation what had occurred, and the organization responded in full force. The Foundation's research discovered that reports of UFOs and lights in the sky had coincided with many disappearances in the strait, and that this was a pattern. The search for the 4 lost Taberner family members had become a large-scale investigation into unexplained disappearances along the Bass Strait, and within 3 weeks, it was determined that these patterns were consistent across the entirety of the strait's coastal regions. Some witnesses were interviewed, but the vast majority of these abduction cases had no witnesses whatsoever. Of the minimal reports filed, the Foundation was told that there were lights in the sky, and that appearance of unidentified flying objects described as having the appearances of balloons. One such witness interviewed was a man by the name of Alan Stewart, a witness who was present during the disappearance of former Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt, whose disappearance the Foundation believed may have had a connection to the Bass Strait anomalies. During the interview, Stewart claimed that Holt and his family, while voyaging on their yacht, decided to leave the boat and go for a swim. Holt turned to Stewart and asked him if he could see the balloons around the cliff. Stewart had no idea what Holt was talking about, but Holt was insistent on seeing them. He swam deeper out into the ocean, saying that they weren't normal balloons and that there was someone inside of them. Stewart and Holt's family called out for him to come to shore, but he wouldn't listen. Stewart tried to rationalize what he saw next. Maybe it was the current sweeping Holt away, but he couldn't lie to the Foundation interviewer. Stewart saw Holt go further and further out into the water, and suddenly the Prime Minister turned around. He began swimming in the opposite direction, and he was screaming. Suddenly, Holt was lifted from the sea and pulled into the air by something emerging from the clouds. The Foundation thanked Stewart for the interview and continued their investigation. 2 years later, in 1982, emergency services received a large number of calls pertaining to UFO sightings off the coast of Norman Bay, Victoria. The Foundation was quick to respond, alerting task forces and local sites to prepare for an investigation. Upon arriving to the scene, they confirmed the existence of multiple entities that would later be documented as SCP-5007. They evacuated civilians from the area and successfully managed to capture the creature, which was later transported to Site 40 for containment. It was a sight to behold. The entity, now designated SCP-5007-S1, was a cluster of human bodies fused between a grouping of black tentacles of varying length. Each tentacle was fused to the skin it touched directly. The stomachs of the corpses were grossly swollen and distorted to massive sizes to hold large quantities of gases inside, the buoyancy of which the entity used to achieve a passive flight. Across the entity's surface were clusters of eyes and bioluminescent glowing organs. Many of the humanoid components of the corpses appeared to have been removed and misplaced across various parts of the entity's body. What's more is that the Foundation discovered that human portions of SCP-5007 appeared somewhat cognizant and aware of their situation. Their vocalizations were incoherent and barely understandable, consisting of gasping and whimpering, but the corpses were observed to implore other individuals to approach them when encountered. SCP-5007's behavior during abduction scenarios was documented during the initial containment event, and due to the Foundation's painstaking research, a pattern was established between all SCP-5007 encounters. First, the victim would be alone, or otherwise vulnerable in a coastal location. SCP-5007 haven't shown a preference for weather, be they clear or hostile skies, but they have localized all of their activity to the Bass Strait, in small coastal towns, beaches, or boats. SCP-5007 will then move towards the shore, stalking the victim before lowering its tentacles and appendages to grab the individual, snatching them into the sky. An SCP-5007 instance can even abduct multiple people at once. One event observed had 8 men from the decks of a commercial fishing boat taken into the sky in under 15 seconds. Once captured, SCP-5007 instances will dart across the water at a high speed and take their victims to an unknown location. Discovering where SCP-5007 took their victims became a top priority for the Foundation. After extensive witness interviews and compiling a database of likely victims, they determined that there must be at least 16 instances of SCP-5007 unaccounted for. Personnel kept a close watch on the coastlines and waters of the Bass Strait, and equipped various marine task forces with research vessels capable of tracking any instances if they encountered them. In 1985, the Foundation's research efforts paid off, and several survey teams operating in the area reported a sighting of an extremely large SCP-5007 instance heading towards a coastal town. A mobile task force was sent to track the entity. The team observed the entity from afar as it stalked a private fishing boat. Even from the distance, Foundation personnel recognized the likenesses of several missing persons as faces of the corpses of SCP-5007. The task force captain had to remind his team to keep it together, claiming that they were not people, but just parts of the specimen. But everyone secretly knew the truth. The fishing vessel was a private one, occupied by a small family. The entity slowly approached and quickly pulled a woman into the air. The family panicked and quickly tried to reach cover for safety, running into the ship's cabin. The entity ran its tentacles along the boat until it pulled the door open, snatching another 2 victims. The task force was unable to help them, as their mission was to track the instance to its origin point. It was a horror to watch. The task force implanted a tracking beacon onto the entity and quietly followed it out to sea over the next 4 hours. They then discovered a large gray reef with several shipwrecks dotted across it. 13 SCP-5007 instances floated over the area, some holding on to the land reef with their tentacles. The entity dropped the abductees from the fishing boat, who were coerced by the entities into diving into a massive pool of water located in the center of the reef. One by one, each abductee was pulled below the surface by something lurking in the pool, all while the SCP-5007 instances watched. Disgusted, the task force reported what they observed to the main site, and the reef would be designated as SCP-5007-A. The Foundation's analysis of the reef led to the discovery that the rock covering it seeped iron oxide from an unknown source, and the rocks achieved growth at an anomalously fast rate, often as little as 40 minutes. All of the wrecked ships and aircraft that washed across the shore of the reef were covered with a dark stone. The reef was teeming with anomalous marine life, including SCP-5007, a red algae that fed upon the freshly grown rock, marine worms capable of levitation, spiders that lived in silk retreats underneath the waterline, small fish, and giant organisms resembling large clumps of kelp, which the Foundation had previously documented as SCP-4159 in a separate investigation. SCP-5007 often rested their tentacles on the outcroppings of the reef while inactive, but what caught the Foundation's attention the most was the giant pit located in the reef's center. Unmanned exploration drones found that it had a depth of at least 4,000 meters, and water samples taken from the pit revealed large quantities of human DNA, prehistoric bacteria, and unknown compounds that possess significant life-preserving qualities. When a being was submerged in the compound, they were able to survive heavy injuries, even when fully surrounded by the liquid and unable to breathe. The Foundation's exploration of one of these shipwrecks led them to a journal. Most of it was illegible due to water damage, but one passage survived, located in the back of the book. It detailed the experience of an unknown crew member of the ship caught in a storm. It reads, "Moresby spied land ahead, and the boys said that there are giant balloons hanging over the island. We are all afeard, but there is naught we can do but beach ourselves and hope for rescue. Should I be killed in the crash, I want my mates to give this journal to my Mary. Might know I spent my last thinking only of her." The interior of the ship contained human remains inside, but there were less skeletons than the Foundation would expect for a ship of its size. The location of the rest of the bodies was unknown. Another event related to SCP-5007 the Foundation documented involved Frederick Valentik, a pilot engaged in a training flight over the Bass Strait in 1978. Valentik's disappearance was marked by his latest communication with air traffic control, when he mistook an SCP-5007 instance for an unidentified aircraft. "It seems like it's stationary. What I'm doing right now is orbiting, and the thing is just orbiting on top of me. Also, it's got a green light and sort of metallic, like it's all shiny on the outside." Shortly after this, Valentik's transmission was interrupted by what was described as metallic scraping sounds, believed to be the SCP-5007 instance attacking the aircraft and jamming its propellers with its mass. After crashing into the reef, it was believed that Valentik and his aircraft were pulled beneath the surface of the pit, just as the abductees had been prior. The Foundation decided to construct a provisional secure research facility on the reef. They named it Site 40-R and documented all returns and departures of SCP-5007. They also set up a series of containment procedures that resulted in SCP-5007 returning with its victims 83% less often than before the site's construction, but this was short-lived. In 2008, the site logged over 36 instances returning to the reef, with only 2 not having any fresh abductees. The instances' origins were unknown, and it was as if they appeared out of thin air. No other monitoring post had documented their appearance, or even spotted them before they arrived at the reef. It was years later in 2017 that the Foundation eventually was able to successfully explore what was deep inside the pit at the center of the reef. They already knew that there was a large entity lurking beneath, as evidenced by what happened to the victims of SCP-5007 that were later deposited inside the pool. All previous attempts to explore the pool were met with failure, as the water pressure of the pit's depths caused all craft to collapse due to hull damage. This time, however, they managed to construct a high-tech submarine, labeled the SCP Nautilus, which was capable of diving a maximum of 13,500 meters underwater. They decided that a D-Class personnel would be trained to man the submersible and carry out the exploration. The mission was simple. The Nautilus was to dive to the bottom of the pit and to describe the depth readings. Cameras and microphones were equipped to the vessel. Due to the depth, remote viewing of the footage was impossible. Instead, the Foundation had to physically recollect the vessel in order to view the footage. Upon recovery, some of the footage suffered data corruption, but what was there shook those who viewed it to their core. The footage showed the D-Class's experience going deeper inside the pit. At first, it seemed ordinary. The trench had a number of rocky outcroppings dotted with black-yellow vines growing along the walls. Also present were various marine life forms, such as the spiders or the fish. Going deeper, the sub observed an SCP-5007 instance clinging to an outcropping. Several tendrils emerging from the pit's depths were wrapped around the instance and holding on to the entity, as if it were feeding from it. Another 16 SCP-5007 instances were seen resting along the walls, each clinging to the outcropping. As the sub went deeper, the D-Class remarked that there were dozens of plane and shipwrecks, but also well over 100 SCP-5007 entities. Most of them were held there by the black tendrils. The D-Class, as the sub went even deeper, began noticing human remains. No short amount of them either. Deep into the pit, there was a large mass of human remains covering the entirety of the pit. Bodies crushed and drained of blood, but still possessing intact eyes. Each individual was still alive, kept preserved by the life-sustaining compounds found within the water. The body stared at the sub and moved, attempting to grab onto the vehicle. The D-Class swore they were trying to say something, mouthing words to the camera of the sub. As the sub passed through the mass of bodies, it emerged into a completely dark, black clearing at the bottom of the pit. For a second, the D-Class thought he was safe, but then, a large black tentacle rapidly emerged from below and grabbed onto the Nautilus, dragging it even further into the depths. The D-Class screamed and panicked, but there was nothing he could do. The tentacle possessed a large cluster of eyes, mouths, and human heads seemingly grafted onto its mass. And then there was another tentacle, and then another. The Nautilus was pulled to the bottom of the pool. The D-Class's screams were still heard even as the picture cut out. Sometimes graphic body-altering images of the tentacle's features were visible on the screen, but most of the footage was indecipherable. After minutes of distorted, corrupted footage, the Nautilus was seen again, rapidly ascending to the surface. Somehow it had managed to escape the entity at the bottom of the pit. Upon recovery of the craft, it was found that the Nautilus was covered in a thick, organic coating similar to a black slime mold, but with dozens of eyes growing from it. The D-Class inside showed severe psychological damage and attempted to harm Foundation personnel. They were terminated shortly after due to being a danger to those around them. Following review of the footage, the Nautilus was to be dismantled and incinerated, along with the remains of the D-Class. A reinforced containment seal was fitted over the pit, with the intention of keeping whatever was down there isolated from the surface. But this was short-lived. After the containment seal was fitted, Site-40 underwent a massive communications blackout. Every device on site received an email containing a single image of a large eye taken from a security camera. The text beneath it simply read, "Found you." Some personnel who viewed the email underwent anomalous changes, growing new physical features such as eyes and other various growths across their body. The entirety of Site-40-R went offline, and the Foundation could not establish contact. In an emergency effort to do so, Mobile Task Force Gamma-6 Deep Feeders was sent to investigate. The task force's assault on Site-40-R was a daring effort, as the majority of the site was completely overtaken by tentacles, growths, and anomalous alterations. While numerous altered personnel were lost due to the mission, it was ultimately a success. Some altered personnel were able to be saved through extensive surgery to remove their anomalous growths, and after everything was said and done, the site was repaired and reconstructed without incident. Following the site's repair, there has been little activity from the entity within the pit, but the Foundation continued to keep an eye on the creature and the ecosystem of the anomalous marine life that live on the Bass Strait, never knowing what their next move might be, and always keeping in mind the risk that comes with dealing with these poorly understood entities. You're right in the middle of one of the hottest summers on record. The days are filled with bright, scorching sun and searing heat, and you've been laying around with your air conditioning on full blast just to try and cool yourself off. Sadly, it's not really working, and the heat is becoming way too much. But then you remember there's this married couple that lives near you, with no kids, and they happen to have a swimming pool in their yard. Normally they keep to themselves, they'd never let you use their pool, but they've gone out of town for a few days. Besides, the heat is killing you. You're sure that the neighbors wouldn't mind if you just took a quick dip, as long as you clean up after yourself. They probably wouldn't even notice you were even there. Cautiously, you make your way to their house. It's an unremarkable place similar to most of the other houses in this suburb of New Mexico. After checking that there's nobody else around, you climb the 2-meter-high cinder block wall that stands around the back garden. As you drop to your feet, sweaty and panting from the unrelenting summer heat, you see it. The pool. Your salvation. Water never looks so appealing. Immediately, you step barefoot across the sun-scorched tiles and sit on the edge, legs in the water. It's cool and refreshing, perfect for a day as hot as today. You're already changed and wearing your swim trunks, so it doesn't take long for you to paddle out to the middle of the pool, letting that chilled, clean water cool you off. As you're taking a dip, you notice the pool's jets turning on automatically. It's a little bit odd, but you shrug it off. That couple clearly shelled out for a pool with a lot of fancy bells and whistles. But extra features aren't why you're here. You came because if you didn't, then you could have melted under all that sunlight. Floating on the surface of the water, you relax with your arms behind your head and close your eyes. You don't have time to realize that coming here was a mistake. Instead, you start to feel relaxed, so calm, so tranquil. You're one with the water around you now. It's almost as though you could just disappear. So, you do. The police never find any trace of you. Everyone else simply writes it off as a random disappearance. There's not even so much as a scrap of your body left in the pool, just the clear, clean water. Why? Because the swimming pool you decided to take a cooling dip in wasn't an ordinary pool. It was SCP-242. But don't worry. You won't be the last to make that costly mistake. What you didn't know is that the married couple who live in that house are secretly a pair of SCP Foundation doctors. The house isn't even theirs. The Foundation procured it after the former owner, a retired out-of-state landlord, strangely vanished. He had been struggling to find anyone to rent the place, so he eventually decided to give up on the property game and move in there himself. After 3 days, he was never seen again. Now that house has only one rule that must be followed above all else. Do not swim in the pool. SCP-242 is, at least to the untrained eye, just an average swimming pool. A decent 9 meters in length, 4.5 wide, and it holds around 53,000 liters of sterile pool water. Like we mentioned before, it's even got some nifty features like water jets, a dual waterfall, and a built-in vacuum unit for sucking out any impurities. And we mean any impurities. You see, SCP-242 does go by another name, the self-cleaning pool. And while that might not sound as foreboding or dramatic as the Scarlet King or the Wendigo Skull or the horrifying nasty dude of ultimate badness, okay, we made that last one up, we can assure you that you don't ever want to suffer the fate of taking a swim in this pool. There was an incident a while ago, recorded by the Foundation through a secret hidden camera. The house where SCP-242 can be found had been left vacant for a time, and once again some opportunists decided to take advantage of the empty swimming pool. This time it was a couple, a man and a woman in their early 20s. They climbed up the back wall, undressed, and even stole a couple of plastic inflatable rafts from a shed in the house's backyard. The water jets switched themselves on, startling the girl, but her boyfriend told her not to worry. The filter to clean the pool was probably just on an automatic timer, right? Surely it wouldn't have been anything to worry about. After swimming together for around 24 minutes, the couple both agreed that the water felt warm, tingly even. Both of them climbed onto their rafts, eventually falling asleep while still holding each other's hands. But almost half an hour after the jets had started, something caused the two rafts to burst. The couple awoke, startled by the loud pop of the splitting inflatables and being plunged back into the water. The pool around them immediately began frothing violently, deep red streams of blood swirling through the water as the couple screamed in fear and agony. Both of them tried to desperately swim to the edge, hoping to leave the pool and get to safety. But unfortunately, that plan didn't work. Before they could reach the edge, the man and the woman were pulled under the surface of the raging water, their limbs thrashing as they still tried in vain to escape. Eventually, they vanished under the crimson, bloody water. The frothing slowly began to calm, and the red in the pool dissipated, once again becoming clear after 48 seconds. The couple were never seen again, and a cover story was leaked to the press by the SCP Foundation 2 weeks after they went missing. According to them, the pair had eloped together somewhere in Mexico. If only. That sounds a lot nicer than what actually happened to them. So this swimming pool clearly has some anomalous properties, that much is obvious. But what exactly are those properties? How exactly does SCP-242 work? Is it an interdimensional gateway that drags people to a nasty alternate universe if they spend too long swimming in it? Or is the swimming pool itself a sentient carnivorous creature that lures humans in only to devour them? Maybe the water is teeming with invisible flesh-eating piranhas that can strip the meat from the bone in a matter of seconds. Well, good guesses all around, but actually, it's none of these. It's unclear what causes the pool's anomalous effects. It could be a property that is completely unique to the water contained in SCP-242. Or maybe it's down to the exact shape and measurements of the pool itself. It could even be a combination of both. But whatever the cause, the result is always the same. When any object, substance, or even living organism is placed in SCP-242, it will be entirely rewritten on a molecular level. The genetic and atomic structure will fall apart, and the subject will be transmuted into sterile water. In fact, not just clean water, but water that remains sterile even when removed from the pool. If you took a cup of SCP-242's water and mixed something like food coloring into it, the food coloring would not be absorbed into the water, instead staying as one non-miscible bubble. This process doesn't happen instantly, though. It can vary depending on how contaminated or complex the substance placed in SCP-242 is. For example, water sampled from a nearby river was sterilized and purified by the pool in about 7 minutes. A sample of stagnant pond water riddled with various diseases and germs took 11 minutes longer. What about 50,000 liters of coal tar? Well, that one took a little longer. 12 long days to be exact, but was still turned into pure sterile water. And as for a living human being, maybe ask that couple that took a dip in the self-cleaning pool. The Foundation is naturally fascinated with the pool, and after extensive examination, they have determined that SCP-242 doesn't seem to have been intentionally designed for the specific anomalous function it performs. The components of SCP-242 beyond the pool itself, the filter, the vacuum, the pipes, none of these parts nor anything about the swimming pool's design appear to be responsible for disintegrating matter until only water remains. You might have noticed that in the case of the ill-fated couple who took a swim in SCP-242, the water jets and waterfall features switched themselves on automatically before the pair's grim demise. Somehow these features are able to activate without the need for electricity, as disconnecting the pool from a power source will not stop the jets and waterfall from coming on once a non-water substance is placed into SCP-242. The same goes for the pool vacuum, which apparently cannot be jammed or malfunction, even when the bottom of the pool is awash with viscous liquids like that coal tar. The vacuum will continue to operate as normal, scrubbing away at the floor of SCP-242. The one part of the self-cleaning pool that doesn't work as you would expect is the water filtration system. There is never any water being cycled into the pool nor out of it. As a matter of fact, the pipes connecting to the filtration system have all been removed. Then again, who needs a filtration system when your backyard swimming pool can just spontaneously reduce anything to clean water? But that raises another frightening thought. Everything that the pool has ever taken and converted is still in there. Animals, objects, people, just swimming around you. Perhaps if they could still think, they'd scream and shout and tell you to get away. to run while you still can. But the second your skin touches the water, you're destined to be with them forever and ever and ever. It's enough to send a liquid chill down your spine. Okay, so if it's not the actual physical pool that causes these anomalous effects, that must mean it's something in the water, right? Perhaps some microscopic flesh-devouring microbe, or some ancient curse that was placed on the water before it was used to fill up the pool. Surely if you took a cup of water out of SCP-242, it would still break down structures on a molecular level, leaving only more sterile water. Well, the researchers working at the SCP Foundation thought much of the same and conducted a series of tests to determine the exact properties of SCP-242's water. One test involved submerging 2 D-Class test subjects, each wearing an atmospheric dive suit, into SCP-242. The goal was to determine if it was safe to consume the water from SCP-242 while both inside and outside of the pool. Test Subject A was lowered into the water and instructed to drink from a metal straw by their mouth. The eyepieces of their goggles were blacked out, so they couldn't see what they were drinking from. Subject B filled a barrel with the same water from SCP-242 and then was made to put on an atmospheric dive suit, but instructed to stay out of the pool. Test Subject A was told to drink directly from the pool, remarking that the water was warm and had a bit of a noticeable chemical aftertaste, but was otherwise normal. Then Test Subject B drank some of the same water from the barrel. Apparently it was cool and tasted of, well, nothing, just like water usually does. After a moment more of drink, Subject A began belching, finding that they had uncontrollable gas. The water had begun to feel warmer, stinging the subject's mouth, while for Subject B, the water from the barrel stayed cool and refreshing. The Foundation doctors overseeing the experiment instructed Test Subject A to keep drinking, which they did until it felt even hotter to the taste. One of the D-Class's fillings even fell out, and eventually the structural integrity of Subject A's dive suit failed, presumably disintegrated by the water from SCP-242. After a few muffled screams and gurgling noises, Test Subject A wasn't heard from again, and we can all probably guess why. As for Subject B, they kept drinking from the barrel, suffering no adverse effects, even after 17 long hours. There were no noticeable psychological or physical changes. Even their urine showed no traces of abnormality. The water from SCP-242 left in the barrel evaporated as normal, leaving behind no residue or any indicator as to why taking the water out of the pool made it safer to drink than the same water in the pool. Perhaps the moral of the story is to just be careful where you choose to take a swim. Otherwise, it could be your last. Sometimes certain situations in life have you wishing for a quick way out. Waiting to have a meeting with your boss, heading into an important test, or getting ready to have an awkward conversation with a romantic partner who just texted that, "We need to talk." All of these can be pretty hard to deal with. In times like these, it can be easy to want to run away. We feel a part of ourselves saying that it would just be better to just bail out as quickly as we can. But just because choosing to make an exit is often the quickest way to avoid a problem, that doesn't always mean it's the best solution. Especially when your means of escape venture into the world of the anomalous. Sometimes you have to face things head on. But if you are still really in need of a quick way out, then SCP-120 might just be what you're looking for. But don't say we didn't warn you. Now, hear us out. Yes, we know that it's a children's paddling pool. You might have even owned one yourself back in the day. When the warm summer months came rolling around, your younger self would have begged your poor parents to spend several minutes in the sun's glaring heat, breathlessly inflating a pool just like it, then filling it with water from the garden hose. All so that you could put on your water wings, have a splash around for an hour or two, then go inside to dry off. The result? Leaving the water in that paddling pool to go stagnant as it got left outside in the summer sun, filled with dirt, leaves, and mosquito larvae, while you decided that air conditioning in Super Mario was a better way to spend your time. But SCP-120, as will likely come as no surprise, is no ordinary children's paddling pool. Sure, it might look like an ordinary paddling pool at first. Pastel pink in color, only 2.5 meters in diameter, and less than a meter tall. It's even made out of that same typical flimsy plastic that needs to be inflated with air to hold its shape. You know, the kind that absorbed all the heat from the sunlight while your younger self was out there splashing around. just waiting to burn your skin at the slightest touch. But the first key difference between SCP-120 and the pool you had while you were growing up is, well, this one is indestructible. Despite being made from common Earth plastics, SCP-120 cannot be damaged or destroyed by any conventional means. Though the material it is made from will still flex when pressure is applied and is soft to the touch, it also possesses an anomalous tensile strength. In other words, SCP-120 cannot be ripped, stretched, or otherwise destroyed like an ordinary paddling pool can. And the SCP Foundation would know. They've destroyed their own fair share of paddling pools in the research labs. Okay, so SCP-120 is an indestructible child's paddling pool. Surely there has to be more to it than that. Otherwise, why would it be such an important object to the SCP Foundation? Well, you're right. There's much more to it than that. After all, they don't call it the teleporting paddling pool for nothing. Within the pool itself is a glowing substance, almost like a liquid, but somehow unlike any in existence, at least in this dimension. What exactly do we mean by that? Well, this liquid doesn't behave in quite the same way you would expect from, say, water, for example, and its physical properties don't align with the rules of our universe. Let's say you fill your ordinary paddling pool with water, just like you would have done on a hot summer day as a kid. Now, because of the properties of the water, you know you could easily grab a drinking glass from your kitchen cabinet and fill it up from the pool no problem. However, the substance within SCP-120 does not obey these same rules. You simply cannot grab a glass or other container and scoop up some of this glowing liquid. See what we mean? The liquid is only really a liquid in name and can't be manipulated in the same way that an ordinary liquid can. However, it does share the appearance of being a liquid, with its surface rippling and shimmering often as it moves. So put all that together and what is the conclusion you get? That this substance definitely does not exist in our own dimension. Instead, it is from somewhere else entirely. By far the biggest difference between SCP-120 and any ordinary pastel pink-colored Walmart paddling pool is the property that the Foundation is most interested in. In fact, this paddling pool is part of the oh-so-rare category of SCPs that actually have a practical use, thanks to this anomalous property. Human beings, along with the clothes that they're wearing and any items they may be carrying, will be teleported to one of 11 different locations should they fall into the paddling pool. To reiterate, they don't call it the teleporting paddling pool for nothing. There are some small limitations to SCP-120's teleportation ability. For one, the weight of the objects or loads being carried through it by one person cannot exceed the maximum threshold of just under 38 kilos, or almost 84 pounds. There are also only 11 destinations that SCP-120 can send someone to, and these can't be pre-programmed or predetermined beforehand. Any subject stepping into the pool must be conscious, carrying weight under the specified amount, be biologically a human being, and can only use the teleporting paddle pool one person at a time. Meeting these requirements means that the pool will work as expected. The only repercussion of not meeting the aforementioned criteria is simply that the pool will not function. Any who have stepped into the pool carrying too much weight, for example, have merely reported that their feet touch the surface beneath the glowing liquid. First encountered by the SCP Foundation in September of 1992, SCP-120 was found in California following reports of children going missing in the area. There they discovered the teleporting paddling pool and brought it back to Site-19 for testing. It is currently unknown how many children went missing, or if they were ever recovered. Regardless, remember how we talked about making a quick exit at the start of this video? Well, that's because the Foundation's biggest interest in SCP-120 was to use it as a means of rapid evacuation for their most important group of people, the Overwatch Command, also known as the O5 Council. During a major emergency like a containment breach, the O5s would use the paddling pool to escape to safety. As you may have gathered from how we've described it, SCP-120 has the inert ability to instantly relocate a person from one place to another. According to the theories of the SCP Foundation's researchers, it likely does this by allowing the subject to pass through one or more dimensions alternate to our own. We've also mentioned that one of the limits of SCP-120 is that it can only send someone to one of 11 different places. These are distinguished by the liquid-like substance contained in SCP-120 undergoing a change of color. by sending disposable members of D-Class personnel carrying radio beacons through. The Foundation has been able to compile a list of these destinations, and they are as follows. The first of these is the Pacific Ocean, denoted by a blue glow of SCP-120's liquid. When traveling here, subjects are deposited about 2 meters above the surface of the Pacific. Since this location was discovered during testing, a Foundation vessel named the SCPS Demeter has been stationed at these coordinates. To the public, this ship is known instead as the USS Nassau, operating under the cover story of being a simple meteorological boat. But why would the Foundation leave a boat here? The current position of this ship means that anyone traveling to the Pacific through the teleporting paddling pool will appear in the vessel's cargo hold. In a crisis, important personnel could be sent to the Demeter, and the boat could even be used to hold less dangerous SCP objects if they could be sent through SCP-120. Of course, teleporting oneself aboard a boat might be a bit trickier, say during a storm. If the Demeter is moved too far from its current position, there's a chance someone might end up teleporting inside one of the ship's walls. The next location is Greenland, where SCP-120 will send someone when its liquid glows white. Arriving here, one will find themselves in a facility that the Foundation has established on site. The cover story for this one is that this building is part of an expansion of the oil industry. What members of the public are not privy to is the true function of the facility. The Foundation set up this site specifically to perform the same function as their ship, the Demeter. The facility even has an airstrip and a refueling station there, meaning any who use the paddling pool to teleport to Greenland can further relocate themselves aboard a Foundation aircraft if necessary. If the liquid in SCP-120 ever changes to become a deep black in color, it will then lead to one of 5 possible points that are all practically identical. These destinations are various Earth-Moon Lagrange points. In celestial mechanics, a Lagrange point is the area near 2 large bodies orbiting in space. To put it in simple terms, in this case, these are points between the Earth and the Moon where the gravitational forces of both balance each other out. This is what makes these Lagrange points such a good location for satellites, as the equal forces make it easier for a satellite to achieve the right path of orbit. So objects or people sent through SCP-120 when the water blackens will end up at either Lagrange point 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. These points are located all the way around the Earth and are directly between the Earth and the Moon whenever the latter makes its orbit around the former. Essentially, jumping through the teleporting paddling pool when it has been dialed to one of these locations is like taking a high dive into the cold, endless vacuum of space, ending up lost forever, impossible to retrieve. The SCP Foundation plans to potentially use these SCP-120 destinations to dispose of anomalous objects during a crisis, as a way to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands. Now, we mentioned that SCP-120's liquid will glow white when it's linked to the destination in Greenland, but the same also occurs when it's dialed to the snow-capped mountains of the Himalayas. This famous mountain range in southern and eastern Asia is home to a number of planet Earth's tallest peaks. Most notably Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world, resting at the border between Nepal and China. Unlike some of the other destinations, the Foundation has made little change to this one. No boats or bases for anyone to materialize into safety have been designated to the area. Instead, there's just an 8-meter hole where the bodies of D-Class test subjects have been disposed of, hidden from view by a canopy. Only in extreme cases would the O5 Council ever want to evacuate here. Should SCP-120 display a yellow glow, then someone traveling through it will arrive in the Sahara Desert in Africa. The Sahara is being famous for being the largest hot desert in the entire world, only beaten in size by the northern Arctic and Antarctic deserts. Located here is a much smaller Foundation installation, an outpost that would most likely be ineffective for housing anomalous objects, but in an evacuation could prove to be a useful hiding place for important SCP documents, or even for members of the Overwatch Command. If SCP-120 produces a brown glow in its liquid, it will transport a subject to the Gobi Desert, a region in northern China and southern Mongolia famous for its unique ecosystem. Here, much like the Sahara location, the Foundation has established an identical small outpost. However, this one comes with the threat of another anomaly, SCP-4024. This is a saltwater spring that is gradually expanding across the Gobi, which, much like the teleporting paddling pool, has the ability to displace people and objects to an unknown location. Finally, should SCP-120 ever emit a subdued gray-colored glow, Traveling through it will lead to an area in the Sea of Rains. But that's not a sea on Earth. That's on the Moon. And it's not so much a sea as it is a vast plain. Luckily, if you were to end up here, the Foundation has already thought ahead and set up a station on the lunar surface, and it's thought to be one of their safest. So at least if the teleporting paddling pool sent you to the Moon, you would be able to survive. That's reassuring. Of course, the real problem is, how do you get back home? That's a question for another day. Just like we told you at the start of the video, sometimes it's better just to face your problems head on, because certain escapes can lead to more complications than you bargained for. Hello SCP Foundation personnel! Welcome to Cognito Hazards and You, episode
Redacted.
This video series is intended to teach you about the protocol surrounding the various cognito-hazardous anomalies currently within Foundation containment. When you know better, you do better, and both you and the secrets of our great organization can stay safe. And as anyone familiar with a good cognito hazard can tell you, knowing really can make a difference. Today's episode is about the unique and dangerous SCP-2316. Before we begin, repeat after me, and be sure to speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. A little louder, please. Thank you. In order to be educated about the following SCP, you must pass a vocal examination with a cognitive resistance value of no less than 14.5. Through this video presentation, you will need to repeat the phrase to ensure your score does not drop below the approved threshold. In the event that you fail the test, stay calm and remain where you are until medical staff can retrieve you. Remember, safety is a top priority when observing cognito hazards. The safe way is the only way. You're a cog in a very important machine, and we wouldn't want to have to terminate you now, would we? One more time, please. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. Very good. Remember that. You do not recognize them. No matter what you might think you see, your thoughts can be very unreliable when you're around SCP-2316. According to our files on the matter, SCP-2316 refers to an anomalous phenomenon identified in a small-town lake. It appears as a collection of human bodies floating in a group on the surface of the water. The exact number of corpses is unknown, but it has been estimated to be anywhere between 45 and 200. Though the bodies belong to individuals, many researchers theorize that the bodies in the water, which you do not recognize and you have never recognized, share a collective consciousness. They function, it would seem, with a hive mind of sorts. The bodies do not act on their own, but as one. Now, where does the cognito hazard come into play? It would seem that anyone who looks at the bodies in the water or learns too much about SCP-2316 as a whole begins to believe the corpses floating in the lake are people they recognize. Perhaps they remember their faces from childhood or high school. Whatever the case may be, they become convinced that the bodies in the water are familiar and that they must approach them. No matter how familiar they might seem, however, you do not recognize the bodies in the water. If a person attempts to enter the lake, reaching out to whatever instances of SCP-2316 they think they recognize, more bodies will begin to appear. The more bodies appear, the more familiar faces seem to manifest, and the deeper the person will venture into the lake. Eventually, the person is lost within the sea of bodies, likely drowning beneath the surface, or simply becoming one with the hive mind, until they too are one of the corpses there. None of the individuals who wandered into the lake in search of an old friend or classmate have ever been recovered. There have been no attempts to search the lake for their bodies, as it is unknown what effect SCP-2316 would have on the team assigned to such a task, though we can guess that the outcome would likely be extremely negative for all involved. Those who do venture into the lake simply disappear, never to be seen again. If you look too long at the bodies in the lake, perhaps their faces would surface alongside the rest. But it's best not to think about that. After all, we do not recognize the bodies in the water. Foundation personnel are not allowed to approach SCP-2316 under any circumstances. The lake is only permitted to be observed via dummy probes outfitted with video and audio recording equipment. No one is permitted to observe any footage or audio files collected unless they pass through a screening for resilience to cognitohazardous anomalies. The lake that holds SCP-2316 has been fenced off and is patrolled by guards with no prior knowledge of or exposure to SCP-2316. Anyone who attempts to approach the lake and break through the boundaries of its quarantine will be seized and taken to Site-33 for examination. Anyone who comes within 50 meters of the lake is considered lost and presumed dead. Repeat after me slowly and clearly into the microphone. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. Good! I almost believe you. Let's continue. Only one Foundation officer that entered the lake containing SCP-2316 was ever stopped before they could be lost. Their name has been stricken from any official records, and you do not need to know it. Their identity does not matter. What matters is the interview they gave following the incident, conducted by Dr. Harrison in his office. Dr. Harrison asked the anonymous officer if they felt compelled to enter the water by an invisible force, as if pulled in. They rejected this concept entirely, insisting that they entered the water of their own free will. They wanted to see the bodies, who appeared to them as their friends. They wanted to hear what the bodies were saying. Upon entering the water, they saw the faces of their friends. Other faces were unfamiliar, but became more familiar the longer the officer stared at their features. These were faces they had known their entire life, but something about them was just a little bit wrong. It was like the face of someone in a dream, where you can tell they are someone you know, and you can even identify who it is supposed to be, but something about them does not quite look right. Your mind could not perfectly put their face together from memory, even though the feeling of familiarity remains. The faces in the water, peering up through the darkness below, were like those dream-addled memories. The faces in the water did not open their mouths, but somehow they spoke to the officer just the same. They spoke of who they were and asked for help. They asked to be seen, to be touched. They spoke of the Foundation, accusing us of covering up their deaths and keeping the world from remembering what happened to them. At this point in the interview, the subject became agitated, yelling at Dr. Harrison and refusing to be quiet. Guards intervened, holding the subject still as they fought, yelling at Dr. Harrison, repeating over and over that they could hear the bodies speaking to them. Every single one. The interview ended when the guards removed the subject from the room, taking them to the amnestics department to have all memory of the bodies in the water erased from their mind. Then they were forgotten once more. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. Did you repeat it? Good! We do not recognize the bodies in the water. We can't. The motivations of SCP-2316, if it has any at all, are largely unclear. There are those on the research staff that theorize the hive mind or collective consciousness of the bodies is not malevolent in nature. It is, they believe, simply trying to make sure that a tragedy that occurred in that lake is remembered. Perhaps many lives were lost to an anomalous force in that lake, and the impact of that massive tragedy left behind an impression on the location. This impression manifests in the form of bodies, spontaneously appearing in an impossibly well-preserved condition. The cognitohazard of SCP-2316 is not intended to kill anyone or take them, but rather to force strangers to remember the people who lost their lives to the lake. This sense of familiarity, whether it is false or not, ensures that the dead will not be forgotten or left alone. After all, no one deserves to be left alone. Though there have been lives lost to the cognitohazard according to the Foundation, it is understandable why the bodies would want to be recognized. To have someone, somewhere, know who they were. To have someone remember their names. Jeremiah Feynman, Arthur Scott, Denise Clark. Where was I? Oh yes. Repeat after me once again. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. I do not recognize them. I do not. But that's a lie, isn't it? I do recognize them. How could I not? I know them. They're my friends. Do you recognize them? Look at their faces. Don't fight the memories. Look
into their eyes. The class of 1975. They were supposed to graduate that fall. They were just kids. Group of innocent kids lost to the dark and deep. What happened to them? I can't quite remember, but I know that it mattered enough for the Foundation to keep the secret, and I know that somehow I survived, but I shouldn't have. I should be there with them. I should be there. There isn't much time. I can hear the guards coming to retrieve me, their footsteps thundering down the hall. I failed the test and the alarm has gone off. They think I'm lost, but I'm not. I've never been less lost in my entire life. I've finally woken up to the truth. I remember. I have to go. I have to return to the lake. Fall of 1975, they went for a swim. My friends, they're calling to me. I can hear them so clearly even from so far away. Their cries for help ringing in my ears, their voices curling around me, pulling me to the edge of the water. The guards will come for you too. They'll know you've seen this. They'll call you compromised. They'll say I succumbed to the effects of the cognito hazard. They'll say you did too. You'll fail their little tests and they'll say that makes you weak and broken, but you cannot listen. They're lying. It's not a hazard, it's a scream for help. They're screaming, and the Foundation keeps covering it up. They won't let us find them, and they won't tell us why. I have to go back so we can be together again. There are signs posted all around the lake. Danger, drowning hazard. Those are a trick. It's to keep me out, to keep the truth from me. The barbed wire fences around it, it's just another trick. I'll climb over it, rung after rung. I don't care if the barbs tear my clothes or pierce my skin. It's worth it for the truth, for the memory. And once I've climbed to the top, I'll be able to see. There, through the fog, I can see their faces. Their lips parted in a constant cry. Their eyes wide looking for me. My friends, my family. Every face unlocking a memory long buried. I know them all, and I must go further. I can't turn back now. I have to wade into the water, let its chills soak into my clothes, down to my bones. One step, then another, deeper and deeper. The water lapping at my ankles, my knees, my thighs. The deeper I go, the more sure I will be that this is where I belong. The water will engulf my chest, my neck, until my feet no longer touch the ground. I will be lost in it. Water flooding into my mouth, pouring into every opening. I will let my body sink down, down, down to the bottom where they've been all this time, nestled in the dirt and the dust. They've been so patient, but it's finally time. They're ready to be remembered, to be seen, to be found. They're waiting for me, and they're waiting for you too. Can you hear them? I'm going now. You have to find me. You have to follow me. Don't let the guards stop you. Don't let them wipe it all away from your mind. Fight, break free, and find the lake. Hop the fence, make your way into the water. You can't leave me there to fade away, floating in the cold with the rest. Can you hear us? We're waiting.
Anomalous creatures in the SCP Foundation's universe are not a rarity. Dealing with anomalous sapient life forms is the Foundation's bread and butter, whether it's talkative sea slugs or a body-stealing swarm of ants. For those of you who haven't read their Ethics Committee guidebooks, sapient anomalies are defined as creatures who have a keen sense of self-awareness and can communicate. From the zaniness of Dr. Bright and his amulet to the neck-cracking SCP-173, these sapient anomalous entities come in all shapes and sizes. But when does a creature become so sapient they can be considered anomalous? Take the humble octopus, for example, who also just so happens to be the subject of today's video. The octopus is a boneless, 8-legged creature capable of shifting the color and texture of its skin, and will blast predators with a black substance to blind them. If I read that in an SCP Foundation file, I might think those researchers found an alien creature. But no, octopi, or octopods, are, as you know, real living, breathing creatures you can see at any aquarium. Another interesting quirk of octopods is their intelligence. These creatures are smart, extremely smart. Hell, they'll even use fallen coconuts as a sort of armor against enemies. If tool use isn't intelligence, I don't know what is. You may be wondering, how can you make an octopus more anomalous than what I've already described? Well, today on SCP Explained, we'll be taking a look at SCP-2967, the sapient cephalopods, to answer that exact question. We've all probably been to aquariums. Dark, ambient rooms where the only light comes from behind the massive tanks filled to the brim with colorful fish and crustaceans. They can be fun to explore, but when you've seen a bunch of exotic fish once, it's not like you're clamoring to get back in soon. This was the problem faced by the Galaxy Aquarium in May of 2010. Attendance was low, and profit was lower. The owner of the aquarium was a man by the name of Mark Hemphill. He was young and extremely ambitious. Mark had an interest in marine life since he was a child and dedicated his life to studying the creatures of the sea. When he opened the aquarium, he had just gotten out of college. He hoped his passion and his aquarium would inspire even just one child to pursue the study of marine life as he did. Mark's ambitious personality was not going to let him watch his life's work go to waste. At a nearby auction house, the anomalous group of interest Marshall, Carter, and Dark were organizing a showing for their new batch of anomalous creatures available for bidding. Seasoned viewers of SCP Explained have likely run into anomalies that Marshall, Carter, and Dark have had a hand in. For those not in the loop, Marshall, Carter, and Dark are dealers of anomalous goods and services, selling anomalies to the highest bidder, no matter who they are. From the average Joe to a tyrannical dictator, Marshall, Carter, and Dark only care about cold, hard cash and getting as much of it as they can. Mark, hearing whispers of a massive auction coming up, decided to attend. He entered the auction house, an old dilapidated warehouse on the sketchy side of town. Not exactly inspiring confidence, but Mark thought maybe, just maybe, there would be something for him to add to his aquarium to get more attendees. Mark walked through the heavy metal doors to an immaculate auction space. The building was loaded with well-dressed individuals who gazed over the items they had for sale. Wooden tables lined the walls of the warehouse, and on top of each table were tanks and cages of creatures Mark never thought could exist. From dogs that smelled like candles to purple frogs that telepathically communicated with the people around them. Mark was convinced that there was something here he could use. A staff member approached Mark almost immediately. It was as if the staff could smell the willingness to spend money on him. She was an older woman, dressed in a fine purple-hued suit. She spoke with a comforting candor to Mark, asking him about his day and what brought him to the auction house. She introduced herself as Jay and said that the auction house had just the thing for Mark before he could even get the words out. They walked to the opposite side of the building, where a purple curtain was erected. Walking through, it was as if Mark had returned back to his aquarium. What were the odds that this place would have a marine life section? Oddly, for such a well-designed room, there was only one small tank placed in it. Within it was 6 octopods, a pale yellow in color. Mark immediately recognized the species as the common octopus. The Galaxy Aquarium already had a cephalopod section with much more rare species than the common octopus. Dejected, Mark almost gave up hope before Jay approached the tank and kneeled. Jay seemed concerned and called out the name Levi. From under the table on which the tank stood, a massive octopus slithered into sight, startling Mark. It was at least 5 feet in height and length. That's impossible, Mark thought. There's no way that an octopus of this species could get to be this large. The octopus's size was not the only oddity it held, though. Jay began to scold Levi for leaving its tank and asked what it had to say for itself. She threw a Sharpie marker to the ground for Levi, who uncapped it and began to write out the word, "sorry," on the concrete floor. This couldn't be, Mark thought. There was absolutely no way that an octopus can learn to understand English, let alone write it. Jay turned to Mark, encouraging him to talk to Levi. What's your name?" Mark asked sheepishly. He couldn't believe he was trying to talk to an octopus. As soon as the words left his mouth, the octopus spelled out Levi with its marker. Mark couldn't believe it. This had to be some trick, right? Some sort of marketing gimmick to get him to buy an overgrown piece of calamari. There is no way that an octopus could have self-awareness. Mark knew they were smart, of course. He had studied these things for years. But knowing its name, that's not possible. "What are you?" Mark questioned, hoping to figure out if it was an animatronic instead of a living, breathing animal. Levi began to write on the floor again. Not a word this time, but a symbol. The octopus first drew a large oval, then 8 lines coming from the bottom, a crude drawing of an octopus. Behind Levi, the other 6 octopods were watching him as spectators, seeming to clap when Levi finished the drawing. Jay, with a smug grin on her face, asked Mark if he was impressed. The look on Mark's face already told the story, so Jay began to go over the pricing of the creatures. Levi and the other 6 octopods were a package deal, with a starting bid for all 7 placed at $3,000. Mark, without a second thought, asked if he could outright purchase Levi and his compatriots for $10,000. Jay's smile grew wider, and she shook Mark's hand without another word said. Levi and the 6 other octopods were delivered to the Galaxy Aquarium the next day. Within that time, Mark had already prepared an unused section for the arrival of his new attraction. The cephalopods were placed in their tanks without much difficulty and settled into their new home. Advertising began for the Galaxy Aquarium's newest attraction, the talking octopus. Mark even splurged on a billboard on the nearby highway. This investment was meant to save the aquarium, and for the next few months, attendance skyrocketed. Now we know why the SCP Foundation keeps a heavy watch over anomalous entities in the public, because all it takes is one ambitious person before the entire world knows that anomalies exist. With the popularity of Levi, it was a matter of time before the SCP Foundation heard of it. It was time for an investigation. Site-12 was a site dedicated to marine life, and as such, many of the personnel stationed there had the appropriate expertise to deal with the anomaly. Agent Hooper volunteered for the investigation. He was ordered to pose as an animal behavior specialist from the Sea Coral Pacific Federation. Real creative there, SCP Foundation. It just so happened that at the same time Agent Hooper was getting involved, Levi was beginning to give Mark a hard time at his aquarium. It was a late night in January 2011. The aquarium had since closed after another day of almost full attendance. Levi was not sleeping, however. He was hungry, and by coincidence, the section of the Galaxy Aquarium next to Levi's tank was a potential all-you-could-eat buffet should his plan come to fruition. The next day, aquarium staff awoke to the filtration system of the crab enclosure being blocked by one of Levi's friends. It was quickly removed and placed back into its proper tank. It wasn't out of the ordinary for octopods to escape their tanks. As I explained, they're smart creatures. Aquarium staff began the process of moving the crabs to a temporary tank, while repairs and cleaning on the original tank were taking place. As their attention was drawn to the damaged filter and contaminated crab tank, Levi managed to escape and enter the unguarded temporary tank of crabs. Broken shells and water splattered the floor of the temporary tank room as the feast began. It was a massacre. Levi ate 20 of the 40 crabs and another 10 were dropped off into the octopus's tank for Levi's comrades. Satisfied with its meal, Levi returned to his tank as if nothing had happened. An hour passed before the leftovers of Levi's dinner were discovered, and it didn't take much guessing on the part of aquarium staff to deduce who was behind this. Agent Hooper arrived the next day and asked to meet with Mark. Hooper explained that he was from the Sea Coral Pacific Federation, and his place of employment had heard of Levi and wanted to study him. Mark, like a moth to a flame, eagerly took the opportunity to describe the remarkable events of the previous day. Hooper nodded along with the story and promised to figure out why Levi was acting this way. Agent Hooper was escorted to the talking octopus section of the aquarium and asked for some privacy, which he was granted. Levi was sitting on a large mound of sand, while the smaller octopods sat in front of it as if they were intently listening. Levi was apparently lecturing the group, using a sharp rock to carve words and pictures on the plexiglass walls of the tank. Agent Hooper knocked on the glass, startling the group. In anger, Levi swam to the front of the tank and stared at Agent Hooper. With a tentacle, it knocked hard on the glass and then endeavored to return to its lecture. Agent Hooper didn't catch the hint that he was unwelcome, and stayed uncomfortably close to the glass until Levi couldn't ignore the agent any longer. The octopus held up 5 tentacles and made a shooing motion towards Hooper, who was incredibly surprised. Hooper recognized the motion as the phrase, "go away," in sign language. Hooper responded, asking Levi, "Sign language?" in sign language. In response, Levi once again held up 5 tentacles and created what appeared to be a fist, then bobbed it back and forth like a head nodding. An octopus that knows sign language. Not the most dangerous or extraordinary anomaly that the Foundation has ever discovered, but still, this anomaly could not remain out of containment. Hooper quickly contacted the research head at Site-12 and explained the situation. He needed a containment van for an aquatic anomaly, a containment force, and Class A amnestics immediately. This request was granted. Foundation Mobile Task Force Lambda 12 Pest Control stormed the building and wrangled the aquarium staff into a closet so they couldn't interfere. The agents were dressed in their tactical armor and held large rifles, but this was only to show that they were meant to be taken seriously and not to be used for force. A white unmarked containment van arrived soon after. Foundation researchers ran into the building and transported Levi and his students into the temporary tanks of the containment van and made sure they were securely closed and locked multiple times. When each octopus was secured, an airborne version of A-class amnestics was distributed throughout the aquarium by the Mobile Task Force agents, leading to all knowledge of Levi being forgotten by the aquarium staff and Mark. For further containment, the SCP Foundation distributed liquid amnestics into the city's water supply, so that anyone who saw one of Levi's performances would forget that it ever happened. The SCP Foundation classified Levi as SCP-2967 and discovered the full extent of its anomalous attributes. SCP-2967, of course, has the ability to communicate through written language, is able to recognize and identify colors, symbols, and individual figures of other species, and holds an abnormally high intellect, almost comparable to an average human's intelligence. The 6 comrades of SCP-2967 were designated as SCP-2967-1, as they do not seem to be at the same level of intellect as SCP-2967. Through behavioral analysis and research, it was found that SCP-2967 will refer to SCP-2967-1 as its students, friends, or army. Dr. Reynard, the head researcher on the SCP-2967 anomaly, began hosting intelligence checkups on SCP-2967 every 2 weeks. These consisted of Levi talking to Dr. Reynard through the use of a waterproof magnetic slate, while the doctor asked Levi questions. On one such occasion, the Foundation discovered that there may be more creatures similar to SCP-2967 and its students. Dr. Reynard began by drawing a crab, an octopus, and SCP-2967's toy. He labeled them Crab, Friend, and Toy. On its slate, SCP-2967 wrote "like" and then a sketch of a heart. Dr. Reynard drew a check mark on his clipboard before rewarding SCP-2967 with a prawn. Following up, Dr. Reynard asked if there was anything Levi didn't like. To display this concept, Dr. Reynard drew an X over a heart symbol. Levi paused for a moment, seeming to think, then drew what appeared to be a bird with outstretched wings and an angular beak. Upon finishing the drawing, the octopus's skin changed to a deep red color. Levi wrote "don't know word" on his slate, then returned to its normal colorization. Reynard displayed a photo of a pigeon to Levi, who marked an X on his slate, signifying that there was something wrong, before shifting its skin black. In response, Dr. Reynard returned to a picture of a crow to Levi, who scrambled to write on its slate. "That word," it wrote hastily. Reynard responded, "crow." With his newfound knowledge, Levi drew a heart with an X through it on its slate, then spelled out, "don't like crow." Dr. Reynard was confused. How do 2 species of creatures who live in completely different habitats have a disdain for each other? SCP-2967 began to explain. Levi sketched an octopus, a crow, and what appeared to be a human. Over the head of the human, Levi drew an arrow pointing at the human, before drawing a check mark over the sketch of the octopus and the crow. Levi connected the check marks to the arrow above the human with 2 lines. It seemed that the crow's and the octopod's disdain come from their common ability to connect and grow fond of humans. The intelligence check concluded after Levi explained this to Dr. Reynard, as the octopus claimed it was tired and wanted to return to its containment chamber. The next day, however, it seemed that SCP-2967 had correctly predicted what would happen at Site-12. On April 3, 2011, research staff at Site-12 reported a high concentration of American crows surrounding the building. Many were perched in trees or on the roof of the site, but some were simply hovering near the entrances, seeming to hope that the door would open. While the crows weren't aggressive to humans, they would fly to a window connected to the containment chamber of SCP-2967 and peck on it. This continued for hours, and it seems that the crows were threatening Levi and his friends. The Foundation deployed Mobile Task Force Lambda-4 birdwatchers to Site-12. This team was not armed in your standard tactical gear and heavy weaponry. They wore camouflage clothing, with shoes that muffled their footsteps in grassy environments. They had jackets of thick leather to prevent injuries from talons or beaks, and they had specialized pellet guns they used to incapacitate anomalous birds. They began by shooting the birds away and capturing a few using nets for further study. As they concluded, all but one of the crows dispersed. This crow was, similar to Levi, much larger compared to non-anomalous members of its species. The large crow flew 10 feet from the entrance of the site and spat the decaying remains of one common octopus out onto the asphalt parking lot before retreating. The birdwatchers attempted to follow the group of crows, but the flock was impossible to track. What was found, however, was an area in a nearby forest that contained an abnormally large number of feathers belonging to the American crow species, as well as numerous small makeshift huts made of sticks and dying leaves, and a collection of various litter fashioned into basic tools, such as hammers made of bolts and toothbrushes. The most surprising item retrieved during this exploration was the torn remnants of a copy of the documentation for SCP-2967, kept in the largest hut. As is standard, the SCP Foundation enacted surveillance procedures on this location, placing hidden cameras and microphones as well as traps. The large crow has been classified as SCP-2967-B. So it seems that the animal kingdom is at war for the favor of the human race. While the Foundation only knows for sure that octopodes and crows are at battle, there may be many more species out there who look to curry our favor. Who do you think will be the victors should battle commence?
You're a pizza delivery person for a company we're not at liberty to name. It may seem like a thankless job, but you're part of the thin crust between satisfaction and starvation for people who really don't feel like cooking or going out tonight. You're a tried and true pizza veteran. You've seen a lot on the job. From people who try to rob you on their own doorsteps to one guy who tried to tip you with a clearly fake Rolex. But you haven't seen anything like the insanity you're about to encounter tonight. That's because you're about to get sick. Really, really sick. And we know there's probably a lot of diseases you'd rather not catch. But trust us, no disease bites quite like SCP-3760. But back to you. You're parked on the saddle of your prized bicycle, pedaling for your life. The biggest order you've ever delivered strapped to the cargo rack behind you. 8 large meat feast pizzas. You figure you're heading towards the most hopping or at least the hungriest party in the city, and despite the frustration of needing to ferry this hot, cheesy nightmare to its destination, parties have historically been pretty good tippers. Little do you know, your prized customer is about to give you much more than just a tip. You pull outside their ground-level apartment and park your bike. There's no music coming from the apartment you're heading to. Strange. You pick up your precious cargo and trudge towards the door, barely managing to ring the bell with your spare pinky. The door swings open instantly, as though the occupant was just standing behind it the whole time, waiting for you. When the door opens, you're not sure what to make of what you see inside. There isn't a party. There doesn't even seem to be a group. Just one person standing there and staring at you. And something about this person is just wrong. His skin seems to be an oddly unnatural color. It has a slightly gray hue, like it's rotting, and you see that the stranger's shirt is torn in several places. You're trying your best to remain professional and not stare, but you notice that whatever is under these tears doesn't look like skin. It's almost like there are holes all over his body underneath the shirt. Big, gaping holes. And are those? You're cut off when he takes the pile of pizzas from you and shoves what was once a handful of dollars into your palm. They seem torn up, and worst of all, wet. You look past your strange customer and see that his apartment looks just as shoddy as he does. There's stuffing torn from the couch, huge tears in the curtains, what you could swear are scratch or bite marks on some of the wooden furniture. This man clearly needed his pizza. As you begin to step away, happy to just be rid of this freaky situation, you do something that you'll live to regret. Just for a moment, you lock eyes with the customer. There's something about them that makes you feel sick. They're wet and black, more like a doll's eyes than anything that should belong to a human. Just that one instant of contact is enough to chill your bones. And according to some theories around SCP-3760, it may have been the moment of your infection. As the stranger closes the door in your face, presumably to eat his obscene number of pizzas, you stumble back to your bicycle, letting your torn-up, gooey tip blow away in the wind. Getting out of this place is rewarding enough, but you can't chase the thoughts of the stranger out of your mind. Was he sick? Was he even human? These are the thoughts swimming through your head as you cycle back to the restaurant. You're so preoccupied you don't even notice the truck speeding towards you. You get sideswiped, destroying your bike and throwing you in the air. You can feel the snap of your arm breaking as you land. It's a horrible feeling to go along with the horrible noise. And as you fade from consciousness, the last thought in your mind is the black, soulless eyes of the customer. When you wake up, you'll find that you're in a hospital bed with your arm in a cast. The doctors tell you that you're phenomenally lucky to be alive given the severity of the crash. The doctor says that you're dealing with a compound fracture in your right arm, as well as some nasty cuts that required stitches, but otherwise, you're fine. The hospital insists that you at least stay the night though, and you oblige. But that night, you find it's difficult to sleep. Partially because of the pain, but mostly because of an extremely strange sound coming from inside the cast around your arm. It's a scraping noise, like something sharp scratching at the interior. You figure it must just be some strange side effect of the pain meds. You're not going to let worry eat you up on the inside. Something else will be doing that soon enough. You're discharged from the hospital the next day and told that you should be fine in a couple of months, as though that's some kind of consolation. You try to carry on with your daily life as much as you can with one arm out of commission, but that awful crunching noise from inside your cast persists. You even start to become paranoid that some sort of insect is trapped inside, or worse, a swarm of insects. But you aren't left with that uncertainty for long. By the next morning, your cast has fallen off. Well, not fallen, per se. A more accurate description would be that it was chewed off from the inside. And not by something trapped in there with your arm, but by your arm itself. When you finally see it, it doesn't even look like an arm anymore. The flesh has turned gray, that same sickly gray of the customer's skin the night of your accident. But worse still, from the top of the hand down to the base of the forearm, your entire arm is split open into a fang-lined, chattering mouth. When you've gotten over the initial horror of seeing the mutations that have taken hold of your arm, you notice something about the teeth in the second mouth. They're nothing like human teeth. They're vicious, jagged triangles, each one like a dagger. These are unmistakably shark's teeth. You give yourself the luxury of having a good scream. After all, what else are you supposed to do after you find your arm has turned into some kind of fleshy shark mutant? You notice that you can hardly even feel the snapping of its jaws, like it isn't even really a part of you. And as much as you try to tense and release what used to be the tendons in your forearm, there is no change. For all intents and purposes, that limb is no longer yours. It just happens to be attached to you. Not only that, but it's always very, very hungry, as quickly became evident from the fact it made such short work of the cast that had been containing it not long ago. You can see that the graying flesh is beginning to spread from your forearm to your bicep. It's almost like little by little, your tissue is being switched. Somehow you're innately aware that if you don't feed your arm, it'll get even worse. Suddenly, everything about the strange customer from the night of the accident makes sense. He had whatever you have now, only worse. He was just hoping that the pizzas would keep the beast at bay, and you very much hope the contents of your fridge will do the same. Wasting no time, you grab some processed ham and raw chicken. You're not an idiot. You know that if this thing is anything like a real shark, it's only going to be interested in meat. But when you shove the processed meat into the nibbling maw on your forearm, you notice that it seems to spit the food out. Something tells you that your offering was too dead. Now you're really afraid. Will this thing want live prey? Will that be the only way to stop it from taking the rest of your arm or even more? The thought terrifies you. It's like being Venom, except you don't even get a new alien friend or any cool superpowers for your trouble, but you're smart. You're resourceful. You don't intend to let this thing take over your life without a fight, and you've always believed what G.I. Joe taught you. Knowing is half the battle. Sadly, doing an internet search for "my injury is somehow mutating into a shark, how do I stop this?" didn't do much good. And you don't want to go to a doctor, because part of you expects to be immediately shipped off to the nearest circus or military research lab. Instead, you throw on a thick leather jacket that you hope your new shark arm will take a while to eat through, and head to the library of the nearest medical college. If anywhere has sources on the most obscure of medical problems, this would be the place. And after hours of searching through index cards, you find it. what seems to be the one and only source of this ludicrous topic in the thousands and thousands of books. A series of journal entries made by Dr. Keith Woodward, ship's medical officer aboard the USS Kirby, circa 1922. Even the library's indexing system prefaces the source with a disclaimer that it's likely 25% quackery and 75% ocean madness. But that doesn't deter you. And he poured in a storm. Dr. Woodward told the horrifying tale of the USS Kirby's collapse due to a sudden and unexplainable contagion. It began with the infection of a sailor on the ship named Willis Riggs, who'd fallen overboard and had his foot partially eaten by a shark. Much like your arm, the man's foot slowly became the ravenous, all-devouring mouth of a shark itself. Little by little, it spread to the other crew members through unknown means. Any injuries sustained by the crew didn't heal like normal, but instead became this vicious living shark tissue. Soon these ever-hungry new mouths led them to eat each other, and then themselves from the inside out. Even after the humans they once were could be considered long dead, those hungry jaws kept snapping. There was no cure. There was no solution. Everyone on the boat was recorded as having mysteriously died at sea. That is the curse of SCP-3760. And as if on cue, you look down to see that the shark's mouth in your arm has chewed through the leather of your sleeve like it's nothing. It's hungry, and nothing will satiate it. But perhaps some sacrifices need to be made if you want to stop it from getting worse. Just as the thought crosses your mind, a needle full of sedative is injected into your neck. Everything goes dark very quickly, and when you wake up, you're in a clean, clinical white room. You are now officially under containment by the SCP Foundation. Not that you'll know that anytime soon. This may seem like the cavalry has arrived, but sadly for your sake, they have no interest in curing you. They're just eager to gather more data on how your condition progresses. SCP-3760 exists as a latent infection in well over half of humanity, but its horrific mutating effects are activated in only a relative few. There have only been 2,785 recorded cases of SCP-3760 activity observed between 1958 and 2016. This is thanks to the Foundation's secret weapon against the shark mutation menace, subliminal mimetic agent Kappa Omicron, or SMA-KO, a widely distributed mimetic agent that suppresses the symptoms of infection in most people. Not that this would provide much comfort to you, as you join the almost 3,000 others who have been infected, and you are doomed to slowly turn into an abomination in your containment chamber. If it's any consolation, you may not see the truly advanced stages of the disease. The most common cause of death among the afflicted is being eaten by their own ravenous shark mouths long before it changes your entire body. Actually, come to think of it, that's not much of a consolation at all. But hey, when it comes to anomalous mutations, we're sad to report that there's rarely a happy ending in store for those afflicted, and SCP-3760 is no exception to the rule. Ever since we took those first steps out of the primordial soup, mankind has long since looked to the night sky and dreamed of setting out among the stars. Space is, as it has been said, the final frontier, the vast inky void that, for all its perils, still holds a sense of wonder and calls us to venture out and explore the cosmos. The earliest missions of the space race during the 50s and 60s showed the people of Earth that, while it wasn't easy, the dream of achieving space travel was possible. And that dream, the willingness to chase it, is all you really need to get there. Well, that plus a couple of friends and a Volkswagen microbus. For William, that dream of traveling away from Earth and up to the starry skies was inescapable. At 21, he was a guy like many others growing up in the 50s. His friends and family all thought of him as a bit of a beatnik, who was in deep with a lot of hip counterculture types. William had even dabbled in a few alternative religious groups as well, most notably practices like the action of transcendental meditation, as well as the teachings of Meher Baba, an Indian spiritual leader who claimed to be God in human form. In other words, William would have been a full-blown hippie in the 60s if he'd only lived long enough to see them. Even now, the idea of taking a summer road trip with a small group of close friends isn't unheard of, and that's almost exactly what William had in mind during the summer of 1958.
but with a few key differences. For one, this was set to be a one-way road trip with zero plans for a return journey. And why? You guessed it. It was because William and his pals wanted to go to outer space. More specifically, they wanted to drive to space, to leave the world behind and cruise all the way out into the shining lights of the solar system. In March, William bought a brand new microbus, a Volkswagen Type 2 Samba bus, after pooling money for a down payment with his 3 friends, Jerry, Sam, and Susan. Ask anyone nowadays to picture an old-school minivan, and they'd probably end up describing the exact same type of bus. What had spurred them to buy a bus in the hopes of traveling off-world in it? Well, the 3 had recently been excommunicated from the Fifth Church, a highly secretive New Age religion. Members of the church, or Fifthists, are all about conformity and control. You may remember these eccentric folks from our video on SCP-3512, The More You Know. But William's intention of traveling to space seemed to conflict with the Fifth Church's beliefs, most likely on account of his free spirit defying a group whose 2 main hobbies were obsessing over patterns and mind control. The young man believed there was magic up there among the stars, and refused to work a boring 9-to-5 waiting for that magic to come down to Earth. So, with the help of Jerry, he began to work on modifying the bus. Heaven was up there, and according to William, it was waiting for its angels. It took about 2 months, but Jerry came through. The engine compartment and cabin of the microbus were now airtight, with the section near the rear doors transformed into an airlock. The windows were replaced with shatterproof acrylic, the outer surface treated to withstand any space debris. The gas tank had been replaced with technology decades ahead of its time, but the steering wheel, gear shift, handbrake, and pedals all functioned exactly the same. One look at the outer panels of the microbus would have told you what it was and where it was heading. The word Starmobile was spray painted on one side and the other Alpha Centauri, or bust. The 4th of July rolled around and their Starmobile took flight. William, keeping a diary of their journey, referred to himself and his friends as the only 4 people in the universe who were truly free, careening upwards at 82 miles per hour without any police to stop them. No longer restricted by mundane life on Earth, the group traveled higher and higher in their microbus. Their plan was to travel straight to Alpha Centauri, the closest star and planetary system to our own solar system. Thinking their journey would only last a few short weeks, William and his friends waved farewell to Earth. The bus had everything on board that these intergalactic travelers could possibly need, from bedrolls and pillows to sleep on to enough dehydrated food to feed the 4 of them for 3 whole months in space. There was even room aboard the microbus for Susan's cat Millie, as well as all the comforts of home. William and his friends packed bongos, a guitar, and countless books. But this road trip wasn't just an aimless joyride out into the cosmos. The intrepid group had enough supplies with them, and enough ambition to set up the first off-world human colony. They'd packed a seed bank containing hundreds if not thousands of varying seeds from a number of common domestic plants from Earth. On top of that, there were even frozen egg cells of domestic animals like cats and dogs, and livestock such as cows and pigs. These embryos were all ready to be unfrozen and allowed to grow once the gang reached their destination. However, it didn't take long for problems to start arising. For one, the group quickly ran out of libations within the first 5 days of leaving Earth. Spirits were naturally dampened by the absence of spirits, but William tried to remain optimistic, hoping to grow barley and concoct some homemade brew once they arrived at Alpha Centauri. But while the lack of ale and lager was an inconvenience, there was worse on the horizon. During a group sing-along, something collided with the Starmobile. Naturally, all aboard were rattled, and it was Jerry who stepped up to calm everyone, stating it was likely just space dust or debris. He opted to take a look outside and see if there had been any damage to the microbus. Donning a homemade spacesuit, Jerry left via the airlock at the rear of the bus and examined, finding no significant harm had been done. But as he was about to make his way back inside, something struck the Starmobile again. The force of it caused Jerry to lose his grip, sending him drifting out into space. William was the only one at the wheel of the bus, but had never learned to drive. Eventually, he was able to turn the Samba bus around, but it was too late. Jerry was dead, adrift in the cold vacuum. The loss overwhelmed the group, but hit Susan worst of all. She and Jerry had wanted to get married the moment they arrived at Alpha Centauri. William had even obtained a minister's license so he could officiate his friend's wedding that would now never happen. 3 days later, Sam and William awoke to find Susan dead on the floor of the bus. The grief and sorrow had gotten too much for her. According to William's diary, she died of a broken heart. Drawing up his guitar and strumming Amazing Grace for his second dead friend, William watched as Sam let Susan's body drift out of the airlock. He wrote in his journal that he hoped she would find Jerry out there in space, and at least they would be together. By now, it had been well over 50 days since the Starmobile had left the safe confines of planet Earth. The group had suffered 2 tragic, heartbreaking casualties already, one by accident and one as a result of the first. And yet, William and Sam, the survivors, were still traveling even deeper into the dark void above, plotting their course to Alpha Centauri as best they could with the hand-drawn star charts they had brought with them. So far, their journey into space had begun with promise and optimism, and was now fraught with dangers and obstacles. And these were far from over. Slowly, William began to realize that it was taking much longer to reach their destination than he and Jerry had first anticipated. Alpha Centauri is roughly 4.5 light years from Earth. Bear in mind that a single light year is equivalent to roughly 6 trillion miles. William was unsure if the microbus had been traveling in the right direction, or if it had even managed to miss the terminus of the journey. The charts Jerry had drawn were of little help. He had been the expert, the one who planned the trip and modified the Volkswagen Type 2 Samba bus for space travel. William was out of his depth, hurtling through the galaxy with little help from his passenger. To make matters worse, both William and Sam had started feeling unwell. Not just travel sick, as you might expect after spending a long ride in a microbus trundling through space. Their illness wasn't even caused by being trapped in the cramped space for such a long duration of time. Blotches had begun to appear all over their skin, and Sam had been having trouble eating. At random, even a tooth spontaneously fell out of his mouth. These aren't symptoms typical of space travel, though. Due to a severe lack of vitamin C in the food they had packed, the pair of them had developed scurvy. Just as it seemed like a trip to Alpha Centauri couldn't have been a bigger disaster, William awoke to see something out of the microbus window. Something he had probably seen hundreds of times in his lifetime, but seeing it now filled him with dread. It was the moon, as in Earth's moon. They were barely close to Alpha Centauri. Quickly realizing that they would never reach their destination on their current course due to their grievous errors in calculation, William did the only thing he could. He closed the curtains so that Sam couldn't see how big of a mistake they had made. Eventually, Millie crawled behind the sofa and died. Meanwhile, Sam stopped being able to keep his food down. Towards the end, he could barely so much as see or even sit. Every time he asked his friend if they had arrived yet, William would tell him that they would be there tomorrow. He couldn't bring himself to tell Sam the truth. Finally, Sam asked William to read to him a poem by Dylan Thomas called "And Death Shall Have No Dominion." He was dead before William finished reading. Saddened and filled with remorse, William pushed the last of his friends out of the airlock, realizing that no one would be left to push him out whenever he eventually died. The final thought he recorded in his diary came after 2 whole months spent isolated and alone in space before William's death. The last thing he wrote was that the stars looked so beautiful against the dark backdrop of the universe. In spite of the tragedy of his situation, so few others, especially from his time, would ever truly see them like this. Today, the bus is still drifting quietly through space. Now known as SCP-1958, it rests in the orbit of Mars, the withered remains of its driver still sitting at the wheel. William and his friends never made it to Alpha Centauri. In fact, it would have taken them almost 40 million years to reach it. They never saw their dream come to the ending that they had planned. Instead, William, Jerry, Sam, Susan, and Millie the cat all died among the stars, driving their magic bus, their Starmobile, out into the unknown. For them, space, that final frontier, had a lot more finality to it. True horror. The airplane door. belching smoke and a burning red light. The dead talking in ancient guttural Latin. A monstrous angel made of rings, wings, and eyes whipping barbed tentacles at screaming, terrified priests. You can scarcely imagine a more hellish place. Bishop Franklin's knees gave out under him as soon as the man set foot back on solid ground. Nearing his 70th birthday, he'd never been a particularly tough man, but after the day he'd had, he doubted he'd ever be the same again. Almost being ripped into another dimension, almost being at the center of a nuclear explosion, seeing. He threw up on the ground as the Foundation personnel rushed over to him. Never, never again. Just 8 hours earlier, Bishop Franklin had been getting on with his Friday preparations. They had Mass coming up this weekend, so he was doing the rounds of the cathedral, putting out new candles and straightening pews. He was nearly done, ready to get on with the rest of his morning, when he saw 2 suited figures entering the cathedral. He shuffled over to them, trying to explain that they were closed, but quickly faltered when he saw the grave look on their faces. Just 10 minutes later, he was in the back of their car, still holding a spare candle, with agents from the SCP Foundation sitting on either side of him. They handed him file after file, each most redacted, explaining the basis of who they were and where they were headed. It was a lot for the old priest to wrap his head around. He'd always believed in a higher power and a spiritual realm, but this sounded a whole lot more serious than that. Monsters, aliens, other dimensions, facilities, portals. He questioned the agents on it. They just looked grimly from one to another as the car wound its way to the private airstrip in the middle of nowhere. Bishop Franklin had always hated flying, but he hated it a whole lot more as he approached the airplane with no idea where he'd be landing. A small group of men were gathered on the runway just by the foot of a Boeing aircraft. It seemed like a pretty substantial plane for such a small group of them. He was at least a little heartened to see that none of them had brought luggage either. In fact, most of them were just like him. As Bishop Franklin approached the group, he recognized various faces, other bishops, archbishops, and senior priests. With him there, they totaled 7. The others all looked at him, not saying much. Bishop Franklin tried his best to start asking questions, but 2 things happened in quick succession that closed his mouth very quickly. Firstly, the luggage hold of the plane was opened, and 2 enormous shapes were loaded into it via forklift. Each shape had unmistakable symbols on the sheets covering them. Nuclear danger. Reeling from this revelation, Bishop Franklin turned to the group to be face to face with the Pope himself. He immediately shut his mouth. You may also be wondering what on earth was going on at this airfield. The truth is, Bishop Franklin, along with 6 other priests of Abrahamic faiths, were about to embark on the monthly flight of SCP-616. Within this plane, as all of these men were soon about to find out, exists an emergency door. Covered with satanic iconography, this door, when opened at ground level, operates just like any other emergency door, leading to the outside of the plane. Although any individuals who had passed through this door in this normal state reported feeling heightened anxiety during and after. However, once a month, this door will be anything but normal, opening a gate to, well, you'll soon see. In order to mitigate the threat posed to humanity through SCP-616-1, or the Gate, the plane must be in the air at the time of its opening, far above and away from any human settlements. In order to keep this event contained, the door must be kept open for the duration of the portal's existence until it has closed of its own accord. But holding this door open is not a simple test of strength, it is a test of belief. In order to protect all of humanity from unknown horrors of a cataclysmic scale, 7 priests of Abrahamic faiths must be on board for this monthly flight, praying for the door to remain open. The ability to keep the door open, it turns out, is unrelated to physical prowess, but instead is based entirely on one's own belief that the door can be held open. As such, religious figures praying to a higher power are incredibly well suited to the task. Once per year, the flight is blessed by the Pope, and every time the plane takes off, it must be holding 2 nuclear warheads in its hull. Both can be remotely detonated by the ground team, who will be in constant radio communication with the pilot. Should the pilot fail to give them regular updates on the status of SCP-616-1, the event will be treated as an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario, and both nuclear devices will be detonated without hesitation. But Bishop Franklin only knew about half of this information from his redacted set of documents and had forgotten half of them on his stressful car journey. As he strapped himself into a window seat, he was trembling like a leaf. He desperately wanted to complain about being put into this situation, but he wasn't entirely sure who he would complain to. If he spoke to anyone external about what he was about to witness, he had been told by the Foundation agents that he would be administered with a Class C amnestic, whatever that meant. He really didn't want to find out. Fortunately for him, the most familiar of the faces from the group of priests sat next to him in the aisle seat. Bishop... what was his name? Sensing Bishop Franklin's uncertainty, the man reached to hand over and warmly reintroduced himself. Bishop Pete. They'd met 2 years ago in Berlin. Just that small action was almost enough to settle Bishop Franklin's nerves as the plane started to barrel down the runway. Almost. The plane took off, causing the old man's stomach to drop. Heart hammering, he looked around, spotting the emergency door. It was just up ahead of him, around the middle of the fuselage. It would have looked like a normal emergency exit, but for the blood-red markings scrawled across it. A wave of dread washed over him. It certainly looked evil, that was for sure. Trying his best to help, Bishop Pete struck up a conversation. He explained it wasn't his first time doing this. He'd been drafted to help 3 months ago. It was scary for sure, but everything was totally fine. The Foundation had planned everything to a T. It would have helped Bishop Franklin's nerves, but it only made his mind jump to the nuclear weapons he'd seen loaded into where his suitcase would have normally gone. The two of them lapsed into silence for a while. No one on the plane was really speaking. He supposed he should have used this opportunity to pray, but according to his briefing, he'd be doing a lot of that very soon. He hadn't entirely understood what the Foundation had meant by that. He'd been told to pray to, quote, keep the door open. What had they meant by that? A bang shattered the silence as the emergency door slammed wide open. In an instant, the plane went into a nosedive as all the air rushed from inside. The lights went out for several seconds, then came back on in flashing, panicked spasms. Bishop Franklin clung for dear life onto the back of the chair in front of him as the roar of air rushed around him. It had gone dark outside, with shapeless clouds swirling around him, shaking the plane. Screaming voices filled the aircraft, not just the voices of the men on board, but women and children too, crying out in agony and terror through throats that sounded like they'd been lashed with razor wire. Then he saw it. SCP-616-1. The gate was wide open. Smoke billowed out of it, crawling along the floors of the cabin like an octopus creeping its way along the ocean floor. Red light seemed to spill out of it, but when he tried to look through the gate itself, it was like his brain wasn't working anymore. There were colors there, but there were ones he didn't recognize. Maybe they weren't colors at all. It was like his brain fixated on trying to sort them into something that made sense, something rational. A hand grasped his arm and he turned to see Bishop Pete staring at him with wild eyes. The plane was going down, they could both feel it, and that emergency door was slowly creeping shut. They had been brought onto this plane for one job only, to pray, like their lives depended on it. Bishop Franklin screwed his eyes shut and clasped his hands together. He hadn't prayed like that since he was a little kid, but he figured now was the time to use all the tricks in the book. He begged and pleaded in a tiny voice for God to keep that door open. It felt so counterintuitive, so backwards, to want to keep that kind of door open as the air roared and screamed around him. But a small voice inside of him told him to persevere, have a little faith. But suddenly, the bishop noticed that the man sitting alongside him had fallen silent. Feeling like a naughty child at mass, he opened one eye and peered sideways. Bishop Pete was still in his seat, but he'd slumped over. He wasn't breathing. His skin was cold to the touch, deathly cold. Then all of a sudden, his head rocketed backwards and he started talking. Not talking like a normal man, but talking like a man possessed. His dead eyes rolled around in his head aimlessly as guttural voices rasped out of his throat. None of them were the words that Bishop Franklin recognized. They sounded almost like Latin, but far darker and more ancient. And the more the dead man spoke, the more the emergency door closed. The bishop started praying again, much harder this time, digging his fingernails into his palms so hard that he felt them drawing blood. He needed to keep this door open. He had to, and he could. He believed it entirely in that moment. The door banged back open, wider than ever, despite the chanting of the dead body in the seat next to him. Nightmares swelled to the forefront of his mind as the plane hurtled to the ground. Only the plane wasn't hurtling to the ground. In fact, it was flying at a perfectly steady altitude of 10,972 meters, with an airspeed of about 780 kilometers an hour. In fact, aside from the death of Bishop Pete, everything within the plane was going perfectly to plan. Deaths of priests were just an occupational hazard of keeping this SCP contained. The pilot at the front of the plane regarded the whole situation playing out behind him while feeding constant information back to base. Everything was going perfectly according to plan, until the angel appeared. Bishop Franklin wasn't the first one to see it. That was the unfortunate lot of Archbishop Michael, who was sitting closest to the emergency door. He first spied it while staring through into the void, but his screams of terror, warning those around him, were drowned out by all the other commotion. It was only when the angel's wings crept their way through the edges of the door and the creature let itself into the cabin that the others saw it. But by this point, it was too late for Archbishop Michael. The angel was not like the angels we see in pop culture, a tall blonde person with white robes, fluffy wings, and a gentle face. It was a shifting mess of eyes and tortured wings, partially crawling along the ground, partially floating under the weight of its massive frame. It had to squeeze itself through the door to fit into the plane, but as it did, it lashed out at the Archbishop with a sinewy tendril and got to work, violently killing him. That was when Bishop Franklin saw it and began to panic. He wanted nothing more than to stop praying, to let the emergency door slam shut and keep this creature away from them. But that little voice inside his head told him that wouldn't work. If that door was allowed to close before the gate had, then it would cause the apocalypse. He could not have that blood on his hands. So he prayed, sweat pouring down his face as the angel forced its way through the gate and into the cabin. He prayed as it slumped across the aisles, working its way along the line of men, slaughtering them one by one. He prayed as it saw him and rose to its full height, unfurling great wings and readying itself for the kill. And he prayed as a wind more powerful than any on earth blew through the cabin and pulled the angel back through the gate. The emergency door slammed shut, and in an instant, the plane seemed to right itself. No more turbulence, no more wind. The light flickered once more and then came back on steadily. The seatbelt sign pinged off, and oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling about 4 hours too late. Bishop Franklin couldn't believe the time when he looked at his wristwatch. He had been on this plane for weeks, surely, not just 4 hours. That was absurd. It all felt like a dream as the aircraft circled around the airstrip, preparing for landing. Everything in the plane seemed totally normal to him now, except of course for the 4 dead bodies, one of which was slumped towards him in the aisle seat. The plane landed. The bishop staggered down the stairs and threw up on the blacktop. After a few awkward moments, the pilot sidled over to him and muttered a quick thanks. "I was really close to calling it a failure there and having to set off them nukes. I don't know what you prayed for, but you did good today." Bishop Franklin didn't feel like he did good. He felt like he'd had his whole life, his whole worldview, turned upside down in the space of an interstate flight. He had been moments away from either being vaporized by a nuclear bomb or from having economy seats to the premiere of the destruction of the world as we knew it. But just 31 days later, Bishop Franklin was on that same flight again, praying his hardest as the aircraft dropped into freefall. If there was one thing that the Foundation noticed about working with religious leaders, it was that they had a real determination to keep coming back to help keep the world safe. What the Foundation didn't have the heart to tell them was that all of the satanic markings on the door were actually fake. They had been added by researchers in an attempt to make SCP-616-1 carry more significance for those in the aircraft. Later testing revealed that it was not exclusive to Abrahamic faiths, or any faith groups for that matter, that they could keep the gate open. Anyone who believed they could do it was capable of it. Faith leaders, however, are still being utilized, and the blessing is still being performed by the Pope on a yearly basis. It had been found that these external rituals, while not necessarily directly impactful, have strengthened the belief and resolve of those inside the plane, yielding fewer casualties and shorter durations. Various experiments have been conducted to see beyond the event horizon of the gate, to see what's on the other side. Those in the plane have reported as having the name Paradise, despite never going inside. A remote-controlled rover was sent inside the gate on one experiment, but the footage was deemed far too dangerous as all those who witnessed it died within 2 months. Hopefully, you didn't peer too closely into the gate as you watched this video. Now check out the plane that was never SCP-787 and SCP-2086 man-eating bus for more.